Bonnie Parker's fingers are sticky, half from the Dr. Pepper bottle sweating sugar onto her palm, half from the bologna sandwich already falling apart in the heat. The bread's gone limp, and her hand leaves a print on her skirt every time she presses it down to protect her bandaged leg, trying not to rip the gauze over skin that's still raw and leaking underneath. Inside the Ford 5.8, the dashboard is a landfill of empty soda bottles, wax paper, cigarette butts, and greasy leftovers, evidence of a life lived on the run. One meal at a time, flies circle lazily in the stale air, drawn to old meat and the stink of sweat that never really leave. Next to her, Clyde Barrow sits in the driver's seat, one socked foot jammed against the pedal, his shoes missing somewhere in the mess of clothes and ammunition rolling under the seat. Everyone's heard the story. Bonnie and Clyde, gunned down in a hail of bullets, all sharp suits and doomed romance. But that's the myth. The reality? It starts with a limp, a sandwich, and a setup so small you'd miss it if you blink. Today, we're breaking down their last 24 hours, not just the ambush, but the snacks, the bad roads, the half-healed wounds, and the 1,000 tiny mistakes that left two of America's most famous outlaws outmaneuvered by a cold sandwich and a broken-down truck. By 1934, Bonnie and Clyde's legend was bigger than they were enough to shadow the reality of two battered fugitives patched together and living in their car, always scanning the horizon for the next disaster. Underneath the pulp headlines, it's a story about survival. Each day's goal is just enough food, enough gas, enough luck to see the dusk. But on May 23, that luck finally snapped. Let's set the stage here. Bonnie's right leg is a mess, scarred up to her hip from a chemical burn after a car wreck months earlier. The papers called her petite and dainty, but they never described what 2 weeks living rough in a car with a leaking wound really smells like. There's no washing, barely any rest. Bonnie can hardly stand. Most places, Clyde has to help her out. She's not dashing anywhere, she's hobbling, clutching his arm for balance, flinching every time the car smacks another Louisiana pothole. Their diet, if you really want to call it that, comes courtesy of the Methvin family farm and whatever else they can pocket without overstaying their welcome. That morning, it's bologna sandwiches, sometimes cheese if they get lucky, a couple of warm sodas. Forget the idea of a grand last meal. This is gas station food in a car that reeks of mildew, gun oil, and old sway. If there's any romance left, it's buried under layers of grime and sticky upholstery. Drop the Hollywood version entirely. There's no crisp wardrobe here. Clyde's foot is mangled from an old prison injury. He's driving barefoot because shoes are out of the question. His pants, once sharp, are threadbare and stained. His rolled-up shirt sleeve isn't for style. It's just to keep sweat off his latest scabs. Bonnie's blouse is wrinkled, her skirt is dust-streaked, and her bandages are patched with whatever fabric they could find in the trunk. Depression-era chic. If you're picturing Faye Dunaway, scale it way, way down. One problem almost never makes it into the legend: wound care. Bonnie's leg isn't just sore, it's dangerously close to infected. The Louisiana heat is brutal, and flies are everywhere, on flesh, food, and especially on the open wound under her skirt. Keeping the dressing clean is a losing battle. All they have is some rags, maybe a tin of baking soda, but nothing remotely medical. Every pothole risks busting the wound open again. And every extra minute spent fixing that bandage means more time in the open, more risk of someone spotting their car, and more chance the law or someone worse shows up. If you ever wondered what desperation really smells like, try cramming 2 wounded outlaws, a pile of half-eaten sandwiches, and a festering wound into a hot Ford for a day. The legend is all high-speed chases and narrow escapes. The reality, sometimes, just standing up is almost too much. And as the sun rises on May 23, every small physical problem is one more step toward disaster. That morning, Bonnie and Clyde's world is all logistics, how to keep wounds from festering, how to move without calling attention to themselves, and how to stretch one tank of gas and one sad breakfast into another shot at sunset. The car is both home and prison, cramped, cluttered, and tense. Their Ford 5.8 rattles down narrow back roads, cypress and brush hugging the ditches so close you can barely see a way out. Bonnie shifts in the seat, careful not to let her bandaged leg press too hard against the sticky, sun-warmed floor. Every mile, the ache climbs higher up her thigh. Clyde's behind the wheel, tense, his left foot throbbing. He's missing 2 toes thanks to prison health care. He's in socks again. Shoes are for people with nothing to run from. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a process. Bite of sandwich, sip of warm soda, grease wiped on the same rag they've used all week. If that sounds grim, imagine the soundtrack. Flat soda fizz, flies tapping at the windows, the whine of a tire that's overdue for repair, and the relentless hum of anxiety. The Hollywood version never mentions the flies, but when you live with open wounds, spilled food, and a trunk full of dirty laundry, you stop noticing them after a while. At this point, sanitation just means pouring creek water on your hands and pretending not to notice the gritty. Every minor setback could be a disaster. Bathroom breaks aren't just inconvenient, they mean finding a patch of woods, risking poison ivy, ticks, and, worst of all, curious locals. Bonnie can't get around on her own. Stopping the car takes longer than is safe. Clyde keeps watch, scanning the horizon for dust clouds, any sign of a car that might be more than just a farmer. Even the routine stuff, fixing a bandage, changing a tire, passing a sandwich, carries risk. The real clock ticking down isn't just the law, it's the slow bleed of time, options, and luck. Back on the road, the discomfort only builds. The heat gets so thick you can taste it. Inside, the air smells like gasoline and gun oil and nerves. Bonnie pops open another soda flat as pond water and chews another bite of sandwich. She was never a big eater, but wounds need calories, and there's no healing on an empty stomach. Clyde grabs some cold chicken, wipes his hands on his shirt, and mutters about the engine running high. At this point, it's survival by routine. If they keep moving, maybe nothing will catch up. Spoiler, something's already catching up. Because while Bonnie and Clyde are measuring their lives in sticky sandwiches and roadside wounds, someone else is setting the trap. That same morning, the Methvin family's supposed friends are playing bait. Ivy Methvin, Henry's father, parks his truck by a lonely road, hood up, faking a breakdown. The deal is simple. Ivy plays stranded, the posse waits in the bushes, and when Bonnie and Clyde stop to help, the law pounces. The promise of a pardon for Henry sweetens the betrayal. So, Bonnie and Clyde are driving straight into a setup. Not a mob war, not a cinematic shootout, just a broken-down truck, and the trust they put in people who knew their routine. There's no last heroic standoff. Just a moment of kindness, slowing down for a familiar face that's about to end everything. Here's the bitter punchline. After all the months outwitting cops, surviving shootouts, limping through the backwoods, they're brought down by a sandwich, a wound, and a friendship turned trap. Clyde's focused on the road, scanning for threats, but the real danger is already baked into the timeline. Every little detail now matters. The car's running low on gas. No chance to outrun trouble if something feels off. Bonnie's wound is too raw for her to drive or even run, if it comes to that. The Ford's interior is a death trap packed with weapons, food wrappers, and everything the police will soon photograph as evidence. Even the sandwich wrappers and soda bottles will end up in the crime reports. If you want a comedy of errors, imagine outlaw royalty bickering over the last piece of fried chicken, arguing in a car that smells like a mechanic's shop and a sick room mashed together. If you ever fantasized about life on the run, this is your cold shower. More gas station than Gatsby. More tetanus shot than Thelma and Louise. But that's the deal they made. Every snack, every limp, every stop on some back road is a gamble against the one thing they can't control: who's waiting around the next bend. Now, with the sun getting higher, the day narrows to a razor's edge. Bonnie tries to keep her wound hidden as they pass the Methvin place. Can't let the family see how bad it's gotten. Clyde, always the planner, is already thinking ahead to the next rendezvous. Neither of them knows this is as ordinary as their life will ever be, right before everything goes wrong. Their trust, their injuries, their daily routine, all leading straight into the trap. As they roll closer to that broken-down truck, you can almost feel the air tighten. One final, invisible line. The world's most notorious outlaw couple, undone not by bullets, at least not yet, but by every discomfort and misplaced trust that led them here. The Ford crunches over gravel. Every decision, every tired compromise, every little mistake, all converging on one deadly moment. There's no time to draw, no time to warn. Frank Hamer and his posse erupt from the brush and open fire. 167 bullets in seconds. Glass shatters. Metal screams. Inside that battered Ford, reality finally drowns out the legend. Bonnie's body slams back against the seat, her hand still sticky from her last bite of sandwich. Clyde is knocked sideways, foot jammed on the pedal. There's no way to soften this. Bullets punch through flesh. Blood spatters the dash. The air turns chemical with gunpowder and gas. After months of limping, sweating, and improvising for survival, there isn't even time for a goodbye. No dramatic shootout. No last stand. Just the thunder of gunfire and the thud of bodies, gone in the time it takes a sandwich to hit the floor. The engine chugs to a halt, horn blaring a grotesque exclamation point at the end of a desperate run. And then, for a moment, nothing but the buzz of flies and the ticking of cooling metal. Soon the world crashes in. Locals, deputies, a swarm of rubberneckers pushing up against the shattered windows. The legend is instantly replaced by something uglier, a circus of morbid curiosity. People scramble for a look. Some even reach for souvenirs, locks of Bonnie's hair, scraps of Clyde's blood-soaked shirt, and, yes, documented attempts at grabbing far worse. The Ford goes from mobile home to crime scene. Blood pools on the seats, soaking the mess below. Lawmen pose for photos, sometimes even moving the bodies to make the shots more dramatic for the papers. Embalming is almost impossible. The fluid just leaks right out of the bullet holes. The mortuary reeks of chemicals and death, and the line of gawkers stretches around the block. Anyone still clinging to the myth of the glamorous outlaw couple gets a good, hard look at what's left behind. The stink, the stains, the torn-up bodies, and the chaos. And here's the final punchline. Everything that made Bonnie and Clyde infamous, their improvisation, their stubbornness, their trust in just a couple of familiar faces is exactly what killed them. They didn't die with guns drawn, surrounded by glittering cash and adoring fans. Their last meal was a limp sandwich. Their last moments, fear and pain and a betrayal so ordinary it hurts. The death car became a traveling sideshow, blood drying on the seats, crowds flocking to stare at misery up close, while Hollywood would later wash it away with romance and slow motion. So next time you see the movie version, the immaculate hats, the perfect tailoring, the lovers clinging together in slow motion martyrdom, remember what the evidence says. Bonnie and Clyde's final day was a line of physical miseries and human mistakes, finished off by a betrayal as dull as it was deadly. Their legend lives on, but the truth was dirt, hunger, wounds that never healed, and a death that left nothing beautiful behind, except maybe the lesson that no amount of storytelling can ever clean up the aftermath. Thanks for sticking with me through the sticky, bloody, and all too human truth behind America's most infamous outlaw duo. If you want more stories where the legend gets stripped down to the bone every meal, every wound, every ugly aftermath, hit subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one.